Good morning and welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist. I'm glad you could be with me today. We're going to be studying lesson 8 in the student book this week. If you did not watch the session last week, then you may realize that I'm skipping something there, but I'm trying to catch us up with where the book is supposed to be, and hopefully by next Christmas we can do that when we have an opportunity to make a skip or something and be able to get us where we need to be. So we're in the book of Daniel now. We're going to start in Daniel chapter 1, and to give some background, just a little bit of background. The time of Ezekiel and the time of Daniel overlap. Daniel was, the book of Daniel covers a larger amount of time than the book of Ezekiel. Daniel is, it's very specific on what year was the first year that something happened to Daniel, and then it goes on to the first year of the king of Cyrus. And so we know that Daniel served in Babylon, or was in Babylon, and served King Nebuchadnezzar for almost 70 years because of the dates that are given. And so it was a long time. Ezekiel's time span that his book covers is shorter than that. So I thought about just trying to tell the first part of chapter 1, but it's very descriptive and it's easier probably just to read it. So to introduce the chapter, I'm going to just read the first 7 verses because it gives the background of how Daniel got to be in Babylon. Starting then on chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. And we know those 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, by those names more likely than the others. And of course Daniel, I don't know how often he was called Belteshazzar, but he stuck with the name Daniel, thankfully, through the book and as he wrote the book. And the book seems to be attributed to the writing of Daniel. Some scholars have tried to make it as though it were written later and told about Daniel, but the first person references that are in the book and the way that it's written, it's in a first person, and so most people agree it was probably Daniel who wrote it. And so we're gonna stick with it like that. So in this first part, we see that Nebuchadnezzar comes. It says he came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So we can take that at face value and say that Nebuchadnezzar himself came and besieged Jerusalem and captured the king, Jehoiakim, which was one of the last kings of Judah, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. So some of the things that were in the house of God, there were many things described in other places in the Bible that were gold-plated, or some were bronze and different things like that. Anyway, he captured some of those and took them back with him to the house of his God and put them in there, in the treasury of his God. So this was kind of a way, I guess, of gaining power for himself, spiritual power, by having the things from that temple put into his temple. It's kind of a representative of that. And then he ordered Ashpenaz, who was one of the chief of his officials, to pick out some young men from among the nobles and royal family and bring them to be educated in the Babylonian way, with Babylonian literature, etc., and be brought up so that after 3 years of training, they might serve the king. And so that's how Daniel and these three friends were among those who were taken. Now, we don't know if Daniel was, from the royal family or from nobles, but he must have fit into that category somehow. And so they were brought then to Babylon, and they were given the diet of the king's choice food and drink that the king drank. And so this automatically created a problem for Daniel and the friends, because they would be breaking the Hebrew rules about food, because the Babylonian food was going to be pork, and it was going to have pork in it. There may be horse meat. There may be other things that they were not allowed to eat according to the rules that had been lined out, in the past. And the same thing with, with maybe the drink, if it was something that they were not supposed to drink. And so that's where our lesson picks up then, is in verse 8. And so let's read verses 8 to 10. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. So he approaches this official, who's named previously Ashpenaz, and he says to him, we don't want to eat this food and drink this drink. And another thing that was brought out in the book is that it's possible that this food also was an offering to a god before it came to them, to have it. So that was another reason not to take it. And so he approaches Ashpenaz, and Ashpenaz had favor for Daniel, but at the same time he said, if it turns out that you don't eat these things and you end up looking skinny and bad, then it's going to be my head that rolls, basically. The king's going to kill me if I don't take good care of you, in the way that they knew how. The choice foods, obviously, were were the thing that they felt like would be the very best for these young men. And so, there's a dilemma then on what to do. And I think it was interesting that Daniel now takes his request to the guard because, I think I don't know, I was trying to read between the lines on that, and I think perhaps that Ashpenaz had favor for Daniel and did not care, if Daniel ate this other food. And so he sort of looked the other way, and it came to the guard then to make the decision. And, that's the way those things work. And then if it doesn't work out, the guard is going to be the one in trouble because Ashpenaz has looked the other way and has not said yes or no. So let's read now verses 11 to 13. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see." So Daniel proposes to the guard, let us just try it for 10 days. We'll eat vegetables and we'll drink water, and then you can compare us. We're not going before the king at that point. You can compare us to the other guys and see if we look any different. And then, if it seems to be okay, we'll continue. And so he makes a deal with them. Let's try this out. And so that's how it started. Okay, now let's go on to verses 14 to 16. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. Now, we don't know what kind of vegetables those were, but if you've ever been around someone that was eating like a vegan diet where they only eat vegetables and drink water, they do become pretty skinny. I should try it. It might work well for me. But in this case, they ended up being fatter than the other youths who were eating the choice food. So, we can know that this was a God thing, really, that they were trying to honor God by sticking to the things that they could eat and drink. And God then honored them because of their courage to do this by making it work out for them, so that they ended up looking better instead of worse, and even better than the other guys. And so because of that, then the guard decides to continue this diet that they were on. And so this was one of the first, I guess, examples in Daniel, in the book of Daniel, of where God stepped in and provided protection for them and honored them in the way that they had honored God. So let's go on then to verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. So, God then begins to give them the ability to learn all of these things that the Babylonians are trying to teach them and more. And God has made them wise. It says they had knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature, or the things, that they were being taught, and wisdom. And, knowledge is a great thing. But wisdom then shows that you know what to do with the knowledge that you have. And so both of those are important. If you have just a lot of knowledge, but you don't know what to do with it, then it's not really beneficial to you, except you could maybe spout out some knowledge of facts, but to know then how to apply that and what to do with it is a different thing, and that's where wisdom comes in. And then it says, beyond that even, Daniel understood all kinds of visions and dreams. So it doesn't mention that about the other three, but Daniel himself was given the ability by God to understand. And Daniel seems to be the leader of the four, because it's Daniel that approaches the guard, and Daniel that approaches the official, and Daniel that is given the ability to interpret the visions and dreams. And so we'll see that even, some more as we go forward. So then let's read verses 18 to 21. Then at the end of the days which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And then that last verse, and Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So when they were examined by King Nebuchadnezzar, he asked them, I guess, all kinds of questions, and asked them to give him answers on different topics. And the answers that they gave, they distinguished themselves even above the magicians and conjurers that were already serving King Nebuchadnezzar. So not only distinguished themselves among the youths that had been brought up in this 3-year program that they had going, but even above those experienced people who were there in the court already, and had already been serving Nebuchadnezzar and maybe knew what, a lot of what happened with them, I'm sure, is that they would say what they knew he wanted to hear and things like that. And so even with that sort of insider knowledge, these four distinguished themselves above that. And so they became personal, into the king's personal service. And it says Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. It doesn't say that the other three continued that long, but of course we can sort of feel from that statement that Daniel is probably the one that wrote this book, because he's talking about himself there, and saying this is how long I did it, but rather than saying I did this, he says it in this way: Daniel continued until then. And so the other guys, may have continued for a period of time, we don't know. And so I think that's the end of our first lesson on Daniel. We're off to a good start where God is honoring these four for their faithfulness to him and their attempt to remain faithful despite the circumstance that they find themselves in. And it must have been scary. We don't know how old they were when they came into this captivity in this way, but it had to have been scary to be young people and be captured like that and carried off from their parents and from their families and from everything, and separated like that, even though they were in a place that they were not in harm's way or anything like that. But still, the pressure of saying we've got to learn this, and or we could be killed or whatever, there are just a lot of dynamics that we can imagine might have gone into it. Now the next chapter, chapter 2, goes into this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And he has a dream that troubles him, I guess, and he begins to ask his conjurers and all those people to give him the interpretation of the dream. It's a fascinating story there, how it turns out that Daniel is the one that gives him the interpretation of that dream. Our next lesson skips over then to chapter 3. So I think, it would be good as you read to read chapter 2, because it is, I like the book of Daniel because it's easy to read. It's a story. It's told in the way that it happened. And so it makes it easy to read. And then we'll get over and begin on chapter 3 next week. But read about that dream and how that worked out. And thank you for being with me. We'll enjoy going through the book of Daniel together. And I think for us to take away an application of this lesson, that we've studied today, is that God does honor us when we honor Him by sticking to the things that He has told us to do. God has not given us a tremendous number of rules, but the ones that we have, He intends for us to follow. And when we do that, He honors our life by taking care of us and having His will to be done in our lives. And so it's important for us to also learn the nature of God and how He acts and reacts through the study of Daniel. So thank you for being with me, and we'll study again together next week.